Before we begin, I'd just like to mention that since the best plays will be put towards the end of the list, please do not be offended if your favourite play is right at the start. It doesn't mean that I hated it. Obviously I do prefer some plays over others, but of course they were all enjoyable and impactful in their own right. This is all based off my taste in themes, characters, storylines, and the overall impact they have had on me. If a play is right at the start of the list, it doesn't mean that it's terrible. It's Shakespeare, the greatest works to come out of English literature. It's not going to be terrible, I promise. Secondly, I will be including plays with multiple parts as one play, as they would just be adjacent on the list anyway. So technically this would bring us back to 34 plays rather than 37. Thirdly, this list will be plays including comedies, tragedies, histories, and romances. So before anyone asks, where's Lucretia? This list will not be including poems or sonnets. The Hour of Lucrece is a poem, admittedly a very long poem, a mini epic poem, so it will not be included in order to provide a fair comparison. And before anyone else asks, isn't there 40 to 45 plays and not 37? That is because I will not be including lost plays such as Love's Labour's 1 and The History of Cardenio because they're lost media. We don't know much about their existence, obviously. And many speculate that Love's Labour's 1 is actually an alternate title to Much Ado About Nothing or All's Well That Ends Well, which will be included on the list anyway. Along the lines of that, I will not be including controversial plays such as The Two Noble Kinsmen and Edward III, which were more recently speculated as being Shakespeare's works as well, due to the similar writing style. However, I will not be including them due to the controversy surrounding them. I will also not be including anything from Shakespeare Apocrypha. However, I will be including collaborations, because in retrospect, most of the plays from the first folio are collaborative in some way. And before anyone points out that Shakespeare is just a conspiracy of upper-class authors concealing their identity due to theatre being frowned upon for the landed gentry, for the sake of this video, let's just accept the author as Shakespeare, as that's how we've come to know it. Despite the plays being centuries old, I will say now, spoilers ahead. And apologies for any mispronunciations. King John. Some of the imagery within the play was really detailed and stood out a lot. However, it wasn't until Act 4 when the tension really kicked in for me. Obviously we can't be too picky with the storyline since this play is a history and histories are loosely based off true events, but we can at least pick on the way it's presented. The Merry Wives of Windsor. I love the wives' personalities, but the story was kind of forgettable for me. Mrs. Quickly is a very comforting character though, and she definitely carried the entire show. Troilus and Cressida. I read somewhere that this is Shakespeare's least successful play. Although I definitely prefer most of the other plays, this play definitely didn't deserve such bad reception. The characters were nicely established, although I will admit that the ending did kind of go in one ear and out the other. The Merchant of Venice had an engaging storyline, however I will admit that the anti-Semitism was very provoking. Timon of Athens. A sweet beginning, but by Act 3 it got very tense and I loved it. However, I did get some characters mixed up due to their names being very similar. For the comedies it works, but for tragedies it's just confusing. King Henry IV, Part 1 and Part 2. I loved the battle scene toward the end of Part 1. I loved the induction act which bridged the gap between both the parts, and I loved the fourth wall breaking epilogue, also acting as a nice bridge up to King Henry V. Henry IV's death was very impactful with the way we saw it impact the other nobles. However, the tavern scenes will always be my favourite, as well as Silence's drunk scene. Coriolanus. Things definitely started to get a lot more tense from Act 4 onwards and I loved it. However, the ending was very frustrating. Why did he have to kill Coriolanus? And why did he feel no remorse and then feel guilty 2 seconds later? It took Lady Macbeth 5 acts, other characters across tragedies a couple of scenes, but this guy, 2 lines. King Lear. I'm glad everyone gets their karma that's due. Fantastic storyline though. I'm just happy it's a tragedy and not a history. All's Well That Ends Well. Helena's relationship conflicts with the Countess and Bertram overall kept it very engaging. Whoever said that Shakespeare wrote comedies, tragedies and histories but never victories obviously forgot that he literally has a play called All's Well That Ends Well. Titus Andronicus. Definitely the darkest and most hard-hitting due to the mature themes. I'd say it's quite comparable to the Hour of Lucrece. It's definitely the most gruesome of the tragedies as well. The story itself definitely had me on edge, but overall left a very bitter taste. The characters are all horrible. Not all, but far too many. I liked it as I found the story impactful and engaging, but it's just so difficult to take in. I definitely wouldn't recommend this to people with certain trauma or a young audience. Maybe read the Twelfth Night instead. Two Gentlemen of Verona. The storyline was very engaging and the characters were all likeable. Lucetta was my favourite, although she definitely needed more screen time. I know she was only a small character, but she carried the entire show. King Henry V. The chorus does an excellent job at bridging the gap from where King Henry IV left off. The language barrier between Catherine and Henry was the perfect comedic side plot and the overall ending was truly heartwarming. Twelfth Night, or What You Will. This one we had briefly studied in Year 7 for the odd lesson. They showed us the animated Tales version of it, and that was it. I remember not liking it as much in class, but looking back at it in full, I actually really enjoyed it. The story is quite distinct from the other comedies, as most of them do blend due to similar themes, settings, and character names. Viola is very lovable. In the animated Tales version, I found her very annoying. Love's Labour's Lost. The relationship conflicts were so perfectly played out at the end. Very nice alternative to Romeo and Juliet. Much Ado About Nothing. Despite being a comedy, the character's reaction to Hero's death honestly made me tear up. Well, death. Quote unquote, death. All parts of King Henry VI. The funeral scene of King Henry V at the beginning hit me right in the nostalgia right from the start. It honestly shows how much has changed since King Henry V. Although, on a more positive note, I was very happy to see Joan of Arc in Part 1. Part 2 definitely had the highest tension with Eleanor and Queen Margaret. Part 3 had a very impactful beginning with the Duke of York's betrayal. However, Queen Margaret definitely hit him back 10 times harder. Antony and Cleopatra. Cleopatra is the ultimate yandere and I loved it. I will admit the ending absolutely tore me apart though. Measure for Measure. AKA Isabella trying to bail her brother out of jail or exile for 5 acts straight. All in all, I loved the reference to the title within the conclusion of the play. Everything just plays out so nicely. The characters are very likeable and the conflicts and resolutions played out well. The life and death of King Richard II. I really loved the way emotions such as grief and dejection was portrayed through imagery, especially with the Queen. The scene showing the Queen and Richard's departure absolutely broke me. Although, on a lighter note, the redemption scene with Bolingbroke was absolutely wholesome. The Winter's Tale. I loved the story, although the ending did confuse me. The statue idea didn't really make much sense to me. Did Paulina freeze or resurrect Hermione? Or was it just a vision? Cymbeline. This was a definite emotional roller coaster. The dramatic irony was perfect and I could feel my eyes getting misty as soon as Act 3. The brothers' funeral song absolutely broke me. The ending was really nice though, and I wasn't actually expecting a happy ending, as the first folio does depict this as a tragedy. The Taming of the Shrew, one of the more popular plays. The characters within the induction act were a nice addition, and I'm glad they made a return within the middle of the play, although I think it would have been more effective if they were there for the actual conclusion. The story itself was enjoyable. Katerina's character development throughout was very nicely established. The Comedy of Errors. I honestly loved the dramatic irony throughout. Like All's Well That Ends Well, the title honestly doesn't lie. The life and death of King Richard III. The tension was amazing, particularly the ghost scene and the foils between Richard and Richmond. Coming in at top 10, we have A Midsummer Night's Dream. Love the conflicts established between the characters, as well as the side plots and interweaving stories throughout. And of course, the fairy tale imagery. This one was another one we did in year 7. This one we did in a little bit of more detail, and when we got around to do acting, I was best Demetrius. King Henry VIII. Divorced, beheaded, died. 6 is one of my favourite musicals, so I was very excited about this one. Lovely to see Catherine of Aragon and Anne Boleyn in here. Unfortunately, since this ends long before Anne Boleyn's execution, we don't end up seeing the other 4 wives. I love the way the relationships were written, particularly Henry's relationships with the other queens. The stage directions were very lengthy though, I must say, and I had no way stuck in my head by the end of it. The Tempest definitely has some of the best characters. I love all of their distinct personalities. Caliban is the real cherry on the top. I really enjoy the conflict throughout, and the ending is very satisfying. This is another play we looked at in year 7. This is the one that we studied in the most detail, and when we had gotten round to the performing bit, I was best Ariel. All hail, grave master, grave sir, hail! Romeo and Juliet. Definitely one of the more popular plays. Everyone knows the story. At first I'd have this more towards the 20s or 30s on this list due to how overrated it is, which kind of ruins it for me. We actually studied this in year 8 and I didn't at all think it was that amazing in comparison to Hamlet and Macbeth, but having looked back at it in full, I actually enjoyed it a lot more than I thought I would. I actually recognised a lot of quotes from year 8 which I had forgotten, such as the prologue, 2 houses alike in dignity, the Queen Mab speech, and the chorus. And of course a lot of other quotes which I recognised from other media which I didn't actually realise were references to the play, such as "What light through yonder window breaks." Although the start felt more like a comedy, it truly made the ending all the more impactful when the actual tragedy kicked in. Rosaline was always my favourite character, and when I realised that she wasn't actually in the play, only mentioned, it was kind of disappointing. However, Mercutio was very likeable, although I didn't actually realise that he died. Rest in power. Now I hate Tybalt even more. This play definitely has some of the best imagery in it. The overall ending was very impactful and I could definitely feel my eyes watering. And the overall message is very powerful and well communicated. I didn't actually realise that the character Paris actually died, so he never got to end up with Rosaline, which would have been perfect, but oh well. Pericles, Prince of Tyre. The tension was amazing. I loved it throughout and found it very heartwarming. Again, like Cymbeline, the first folio depicts it as a tragedy, but modern critics argue that it's a comedy. To begin the top 5, we have Julius Caesar. Took whatever was left of my heart and shattered it into a million pieces. The way it's told from the conspirators' perspective overall makes them more likeable, and thus their deaths are a lot more impactful. The conflict and tension was perfect beginning till end. Brutus and Cassius are honest sibling goals / partners in crime. Their parting scene during the final battle absolutely broke me. Cassius was my favourite character, and I was very mad when he died. Didn't actually want to continue it after he died, that's how much it impacted me. But I'm glad I did continue, as Brutus's death was just as heartbreaking. Particularly the build-up toward it and the impact it had on the other characters. Caesar's ghost also does the perfect job of foreshadowing Brutus's death. Like Romeo and Juliet, I also recognised a lot of the quotes which were referenced in other media, such as Mark Antony's "Cry havoc and let slip the dogs of war." Othello. I didn't cry as much as in Romeo and Juliet or Julius Caesar, however I could feel my eyes watering. Although the overall impact of the play was definitely bigger than that of Romeo and Juliet or Caesar. I'm so tempted to ship Othello x Iago, particularly because of their relationship reminding me of Lady Macbeth and Macbeth so much. Othello's valiance right from the start overall makes him very likeable, kind of like Macbeth. This overall makes Iago's manipulation very impactful. He is still very likeable though. I have a weakness for the manipulative characters, which is why I like Lady Macbeth so much. The dramatic irony kept the tension high throughout, and the fact that he didn't redeem but didn't die either really highlights and communicates the message that he has the rest of his life to contemplate this treason, and then this is what I've wrote, with no Isabella to bail him out of exile. Also, Desdemona never got her tissue back, which is annoying, but she and Othello are both dead, so it doesn't really make any much of a difference. Hang it on Iago's cell wall to remind him not to ruin people's lives just because of jealousy. Hamlet, Prince of Denmark. On the topic of Othello, I used to always get Othello and Ophelia's names mixed up for some reason, as well as getting Hamlet's name mixed up with Alexander Hamilton. Now, this is Shakespeare's longest play, so I will have a lot to say about it. The characters are all memorable and unique. The ones that stood out to me the most were, of course, Yorick, who is the name of the iconic skull held by Hamlet. Of course, the meaning of the character is very impactful, but Yorick's name is just really fun to say, admit it, probably because it sounds like yogurt. Speaking of Act 5, Scene 1, the gravediggers are also very impactful characters. With the poetic imagery and message they have about life and death, it honestly gets you thinking. The first gravedigger's song as well is so sad but so happy at the same time. And speaking of songs, we can't forget to mention Ophelia. The imagery within the Rosemary speech and her song, it is heartbreakingly beautiful. Speaking of female characters, I have to mention Gertrude. I honestly don't blame her for what she did. She was desperate in a patriarchal society. What else could she have done but marry Claudius? Plus, he manipulated her into the marriage anyway. So, Hamlet, please go easy on her. I know you're going through the 5 stages of grief, but please go easy on her. Looking back, I was thinking of how the gravediggers are really impactful characters, but they're never talked about, other than Rosencrantz and Guildenstern, who everyone knows, but they don't really do much. They're kind of just used by Claudius. I used to hate them, but then I realised that they died at the end, and now I feel kind of bad. I used to ship Hamlet and Ophelia a lot, but looking into their relationship a bit more, I realise it is highly toxic. I definitely lean more towards Hamlet ex Horatio now, because they're so kind to each other. That is more than a friendship. I think Hamlet is just confined to heteronormative ways, hence why he had to fight with Laertes to prove his love to Ophelia. Which I did think was true love back then, but now, is it? Or is it just compet? This was another play we studied in Year 7. I really enjoyed doing it. It was my favourite for quite a long time. Also, I will mention now that the animated Tales version was made by Painting on Glass, as well as Richard III, and I keep coming back to them because the animation is absolutely gorgeous. It makes a change from the slightly concerning flash animation used in Macbeth and Othello. As You Like It. I loved the sudden tension with Rosalind's banishment. The characters were all fun and memorable, the story was engaging, and the character relationships and development was well established. This play has some amazing female leads, which is unusual for Shakespeare because usually they're just main character's wife or main character's mother, and the slight hints and exploration of bisexuality within the play is amazing. Overall, after the longest time, As You Like It replaces Hamlet as my second favourite play. And finally, Macbeth. After all these years, it still hasn't changed. I love the tension and the vengeance, the story is amazing and the conflict keeps you on edge. Lady Macbeth's supremacy, I honestly have a weakness for the manipulative characters. At the end, she redeems herself, which makes me like her even more. The overall lesson in morality is amazing. The characters are all memorable and enjoyable. The porter is truly the cherry on top though, as well as the character foils. This was the first Shakespeare play we ever studied in English class. This was back in Year 6, and although I didn't really understand it that well until we studied it again a few years later, it was definitely the highlight of Year 6 English. Sorry, Sherlock Holmes, Hound of the Baskervilles. Yes, I was the person who spelt Laughter Hall as Laughter. I blame the animated Tales version of Macbeth for how I've turned out. Overall, it is a fantastic lesson in morality and in some cases the butterfly effect. And that was my list. Obviously, first place came as a surprise to none who know me. Pictured right now is some of my favourite characters, and like I said before, please don't harass me if your favourite play is at the top of the list. It doesn't mean that I hated it. Of course, they were all amazing. And apologies for any background noise. We are currently in a heat wave in my country, and in a country without aircon, I have to have the windows open so it doesn't become unbearably hot. Not to say it already isn't. But I hope it didn't distract too much. Comment your favourite play, and as always, thank you for watching.